there's a lot of curvature of the joints that are going on. So the fingers are extremely important to manifest and build that through the joints as well, to get that connection within the body, so that you can move connected quickly and be able to deal with things. Yeah, your structure won't be able to collapse. If my structure was to go up against your structure, and I was thinking about, I'm in that position there, I'm going to come off weaker. You're bigger than me. You know, my weight is now moving backwards. I'm in a really poor position. If I were to be here, it's different. I didn't do anything different. All I did was I didn't think about you. I didn't care about what you're doing. And I know it sounds like a high risk mentality coming from different fighting arts, when we're preoccupied with opponent A does this, opponent B must do this, we must do that. That's a never-ending game, and that's not where it's at. But you think, and you know, you read the stories, and I've heard some of them firsthand from the days of Wang Shanghai and the challenge matches that used to occur. They were very fast, they were very swift, they were very violent, and they were ended quickly. Nobody at that point was concerned about showing a level of skill by their push hands ability. Or you know, fights did not last a long period of time. It was two guys go bang, straight into it, and then the person was down. The technique was simple, it was clean, it was crisp. It's not messy. It's not messy that way. And you know, one of the first questions you asked me was define Yi Quan and what it is. It's me. It's about what I'm doing. There's a set of requirements that go along with that. So Yi Quan is one of the newer internal martial arts styles. So you have the big three of Tai Chi and Bagua and Xingyi. Yi Quan was developed by Wang Shanghai, who had a background predominantly in Xingyi. He was exposed to other styles and was famous in China during that period of time for being a recognized fighter who had various different challenge matches across the country, and definitely researched different systems and different styles, was keen to test what he had and to see really if he could find better and how what he had stood up to other masters and other styles, and that's really how Yi Quan came about. So I think the biggest misconception about Yi Quan is that it is a style. Some people see it as, or misinterpret it as kind of a Jeet Kune Do of internal martial arts, a mixture of different things, a concept. For me, having trained in the other big three and various other styles, Yi Quan most definitely has its own flavour, is quite distinct. It is very much a fighting system, although like all of the internal martial arts that we do, it has health benefits and other things that go with that, but it's a fighting system. That's what Wang Shanghai developed it for in the first place. It is devoid of forms, although it has some patterns of techniques within it. Like a lot of internal styles, there's various different interpretations of it. So Wang Shanghai had many different students that he taught. Most of them, not all of them, had a background in doing something else, usually to a high level. Many of them were teachers of other internal styles. So I think at that time, you know, it was quite a common thing that Yi Quan was seen as being a bit of a postgraduate style. So, you know, the two Han brothers, for example, were very well versed in Xingyi, Bagua, and Suka, Chinese wrestling. Teachers in their own right from their father, from that lineage, and went to Wang Shanghai and learned Yi Quan, and then only taught Yi Quan after that period of time, which says quite a lot. They didn't call them that what they did Xingyi or anything else. They called it Yi Quan. They changed their style accordingly, no doubt heavily influenced by what they had done before, as you can see that within other, so you see other branches and lineages of Yi Quan that spread through China, and further afield to Japan even as well. So the style of Yi Quan, or the lineages, the two lineages that I do, spread to southern China through the younger Han brother and the older one to Zhuhai. Just discussing a little bit about Zhan, understanding what we practice in each one, why we do it, and why it's important. There's many requirements in Jamjong, a lot, and to do them all at once is very difficult. It takes a lot of time and practice, and you usually have to develop them quite individually. So we do what we call layering, adding them on one by one over a time period in your training experience. And some of the more simple ones that perhaps set my system of Yi Quan apart from some of the other lineages that are actually consistent with the Hong Kong Yi Quan, I'll just mention. So the first one is obviously in the hand positioning. In Chinese we have or Cantonese we have a phrase which is Chom Ging Joy Jia, which means drop shoulder, drop elbow. 45 degrees is a recurring angle that you'll hear in each one a lot. And I can demonstrate that, I suppose, first of all within the elbow positioning. So where we are in Jamjong is somewhere around this position. If you look at my elbow position in there, it's not here, and it's certainly not here. It's a 45-degree angle. Demonstrate why that's extremely important in terms of what we're doing and why we do that. With the joints and the feeling within the body through getting this connection, we're trying to store energy, okay? And particularly within that elbow angle, that energy will directly be stored into the elbow joint. It doesn't work if the elbow's up here. It doesn't work if it's there at 45 degrees. It's extremely important. Storing of energy, and one of the phrases you'll hear in Jamjong is to hold. So I can show something with Alex at the moment. A lot of people mistake the feeling of Jamjong to like Tai Chi Pong energy, an outward expansion, which is that kind of feeling. Each one of Jamjong is quite different from that. It's about storing energy within that elbow there. So if I was to expand it with feeling that, the storing of that energy, if Alex gives me a little bit of pressure, the feeling's quite different.
Strong. Yeah.
So the more pressure he puts on me, the more I'm going to store into that elbow. If I oppose him, if he's stronger than me, what will then happen is you'll see my elbow position start to change, my shoulder will tense up, my whole body changes. So rather than opposing Alex with an outward energy, the more he gives me, I store that in to my body. We're in a classic guarding position, which obviously I talked about I don't want to be at the moment, but it's the easiest way to demonstrate that. Once that energy's come on and I've stored it, that's the point that it changes. And it can change with one connection of point there within the body. Alex gives me some energy, then I will change and do whatever I need to do. The 45-degree angle on the elbow, we call this a slope. Why it's really important. So if Alex were to strike at this hand and I was to protect myself that way, we get into a situation where my hand's chasing his hand, whoever's stronger and is going to win within that confrontation. So that would be a classic example of me being very concerned about what he's doing, and my result and actions being to defend myself and protect on that. Within each one, this I've talked about before about the guard position where we come to fight with my instant reaction. If he strikes again and I'm not concerned with what he's doing, the feeling will be very different. So I'm confident enough that this position will protect me. That's why I'm not concerned on his body. So if he strikes, I'm here. I do not need to worry about anything at all. I started at a fairly young age. I was around 12 years old. I started in Wing Chun in the northeast of England. I'd dabbled in other styles as a kid before that, judo and taekwondo and stuff, but always wanted to learn kung fu. Obviously from the influence of the movies and all that kind of stuff. At that time, we're talking kind of mid to late 80s. There wasn't a prolific amount of kung fu teachers in the UK, and certainly in the northeast of England where I lived, there were very few. And I found a good Wing Chun teacher based up there, who had 15 years of experience. Came from an interest in lineage, so he'd originally learned from Alan Lam, who was the first Western Wing Chun teacher, who's now over in the States, and then Sam Kwok afterwards. So I trained with him from the age of about 12 till around 18, when I went to university in Bedfordshire to study sports science, with my degree in sports science. And at that time I'd had conversations with my Wing Chun teacher about starting a club at the university and going into teaching. I got there to university and there was already a Wing Chun club at the university, and that was quite an interesting change or pivotal moment for me, when I then decided, rather than joining that club or teaching somewhere else, to kind of expose myself to other arts and to continue learning, as I was studying the subject sports science, which was quite integral and very connected to what I was doing. So I then went off and dabbled in Muay Thai and Silat, mostly non-Chinese styles at that time actually. Ended up working in London following graduation. Went back to research more Chinese systems, because London was really the hotbed for a lot of Chinese teachers and masters at that time. So I became exposed to Chen style, Xingyi through yourself, Alex, a little bit of Bagua as well. And I really wanted to get out to Source, so I'd met some fantastic teachers, and realised that training at Source was an important thing to do in one's development in martial arts. So I had the opportunity to go out to Hong Kong in early 2005. At that time I didn't know how long I was going to be going out for, whether that would be for a couple of years, and it ended up being for around 12 years, for a long period of time. And I remember when I first arrived there, I wanted to get exposure to different teachers, different styles. It's obviously a hotbed for Chinese martial arts, predominantly southern systems, but really big on internal styles as well. Well, that's a little bit more under the radar and a bit more tricky to find. So when I first got there, I was the equivalent of a fat kid in a sweet shop. So many different teachers, so many different styles, so much quality with it as well. For my first couple of years, I was training in Baji, I was training in Yi Quan, very, very early on, Xingyi, some different types of Bagua as well. And the Yi Quan was probably the most important step for me to get into that, which was through the Qingwu Association in Jordan. I met a very good teacher there, Sifu Chan. He'd come from the Han lineage, studying with a younger Han brother. He, at that time, had around 30 years experience within Yi Quan, or Yi Kun, as they call it in Cantonese. That was the only style that he had studied, and was extremely proficient. When we met, he spoke very little English. So I would go and visit Sifu Chuan in a public class in the Qingwu Association in Hong Kong, where they teach various different systems, very different styles, depending on the day of the week it is. There's 5 or 6 teachers that are aligned to that association to teach different systems of Kung Fu. The Yi Chuan class had been going on a Thursday night for years and years. So after about 6 months training with him, he then took me on privately as well. So I'd go out to his house in Kuntong, study with him on a Saturday, and then occasionally another day during the week as well. My progress was slow. I would say that and there was some breakdown in communication on language for me to fully understand the system and where he was coming from, and I had developed many bad habits over periods of time training other styles, as you do. Particular, I guess, moment or story that comes to mind is attending training with him one day, and I almost didn't go. I had a very heavy head cold. I was feeling rotten that day. decided to go to the class, and the class always started with 45 minutes of solid Zhuang. And at that time in that room, there was, it was in the middle of the summer. There was no air conditioning. There was one rusty old fan on the wall. It was disgustingly hot in that room. The conditions were not great, and you had 20 or 30 people all standing there sweating, practicing Zhuang in 100% humidity. It was pretty intense. So during this Zhuang, I wasn't feeling any better as the time progressed. But went through, and the way we stood at that time was the stance and posture was quite low. The arms were raised. It wasn't an easy Zhuang or an easy practice by any means. So anyway, managed to persevere and finished off the set of Zhuang we were doing, and then went on to do some basic kind of punching exercises. Now, normally each one is a style that has a certain flavour, has a certain feel to it, and there's many different requirements that you need to achieve before you start to get that flavour and style. And I was probably at that point a year into my training, so pretty early in the journey, and lots of development, lots of things to still get. And we were doing this one punching exercise, into which a normal reaction from Sifu Chan would be to come and watch me practice, stand in front of me and have a slight kind of look of disgust on his face, and okay, and then move on to the next student. So we were doing this one punching exercise which had previously frustrated me quite a lot. During that day, because of how I was feeling, I didn't particularly give a damn. I was quite relaxed. My body was very lethargic and tired after feeling sick and just doing the training. So there was very little thought process going on in my mind. Until I was practicing this exercise, which I can show you later, and suddenly I realised that it felt very different. It felt very natural. It felt very connected, and I saw Sifu Chan come around out the corner of my eye, stand in front of me, and that was the first time that he just nodded and said, "Good." And I remember that moment because I went home that night. I thought, I need to keep that feeling. I can't lose it now. I need to be able to put it into everything else. And it was a real epiphany moment when I did manage to keep it, thankfully, and put it into the things that I had. So it was a great step. So that day of training, I won't forget. I was really fortunate to be exposed to both lineages over quite a lengthy period of time. Explained obviously the background of learning with Sifu Chan, and he's still one of my teachers, and we have a great relationship. Further into my time in Hong Kong, I was interested in researching other systems. One of them being Lihe Ba Fa. So I met an extremely competent and highly qualified teacher there by the name of Hoi Kit Wah, and went to him to learn Lihe Ba Fa. At that time, not knowing he was also an Yi Quan teacher, that his lineage was through the older Han brother, which he had was an indoor student and had learnt in Zhuhai. So very quickly in my time on studying Lihe Ba Fa with him, I then went to study and learn his branch of Yi Quan, which is very good as well, but quite different from the two brothers. The training itself is not that different. I mean, each one is built around the platform of Zhan, building structure and everything that we do comes from that. So that is absolutely consistent, and it should be consistent in every branch of each one. The influences would be, in my opinion, that the younger Han brother was very influenced by his Xingyi. The older Han brother had learnt Lihe Ba Fa as well, and you can see elements of that within the flavour from that perspective. The requirements of the system were the same, There's some, although we don't have forms in each one, there's some set techniques or patterns that are particular to both styles as well, and the emphasis is slightly different. So, for example, in what we call the Hong Kong Yi Quan from the younger Han brother, they practice a lot of 5 elements, a lot more Xingyi. In the power or the flavour of it is very heavy. I would describe it as a very dense, heavy, strong style martial arts, very powerful. The flavour within the other branch of each one is quite different. It's faster. It's explosive in a different kind of way. The ability to change direction, and it's quite hard to explain in words, but I would say just a very, very different flavour to it. A bit like comparing a cannonball to a laser. Standing and standing. And I think this is one of the big misinterpretations around the style. So the purpose for standing and the reason why we practice standing and why we do it is often lost. So within other styles that have added standing to it or have their own standing patterns to the systems that they practice, will have their own reasons for doing that. Usually, to do with developing some kind of internal body connection, whole body power, that kind of thing. With each one, it's very simple. The Jam Zhong that we practice is the fighting stance, is the fighting. Everything is within that posture. Everything comes from there. The punch comes from there. The movement comes from there. So the fighting develops from that very aspect. So what I found with the system, the way that it's been taught to me via both lines, is a very systematic approach to it, of building set skills within layers of development, and the time invested into the Jam Zhong will come out and produce levels of skills, inabilities, and everything else that you do. So that is a critical element. It's not a supplementary exercise to it, as you see in often other internal styles. They'll practice some form of standing to supplement what they do in their form or their system or whatever else. Everything we do in each one comes from that Jam Zhong, and it's probably easier to demonstrate. But that's the first essence of it. The reason why we practice Jam Zhong is to fight. It's not for health, it's not for power development, it's to fight. Okay, a lot of people will, because of the similarities, confuse each one to Xingyi. Okay, in fact, there could be a very strong argument made that each one is a branch of Xingyi. I've heard that said before, and it would be a logical thing to say if you look at the development of the style, the background of the founder, the people that practiced it, that each one could just be another version of Xingyi. That is not true. So, and one of the main principles of each one, I think, could demonstrate that. So for me, each one, the most important thing is it is about your own body, occupying your own body space. Xingyi is about taking your opponent's space. If, for example, you take a technique like a Bong Chuan, it is not uncommon for Xingyi practitioners to have a mental image in their head of, I'm going to hit you with a bong, and my target may be that wall that's 12 foot behind you. I'm going to pummel that wall, and then you're in the way of that wall. Bang, you'll go through. So it's kind of that far targeting in terms of attacking approach. Within each one, we don't have this mentality. The thought process, or the mind boxing approach, which is obviously the literal translation of each one, is on me, my body, where my arms and limbs are, in the respect of how I'm standing and what I'm doing, with no consideration for you as an opponent. So if I'm going to strike or hit, I have no target, There's nothing in the way of me. I'm not thinking about you as an opponent. I'm not thinking about any far distant. It is about me, myself, the individual. That's the difference with each one, and that makes a very different impact and approach to training, the mind boxing piece, and also I would say the resulting power that can be produced from it. It's a very, very different approach. I'm not concerned with what your arms, your legs are doing. I'm concerned about how I'm going to move, keeping flawless technique, keeping my harmonies intact, keeping my alignments. That will then serve me in terms of what I do, and I have little or no interest in the reflection of where you are on that. Each one is a moving style. It's a very fluid. Alex mentioned the word fast. Obviously, any fighting system that you should be fast, and you should be moving. You should be on your feet. 45-degree stepping is how we practice our footwork, and that will also give you some degree of protection. So when you're concerned before, Alex, about me not being concerned on your body, if I'm moving out at angles and you attack, it becomes less of a concern for me to be over here anyway, no matter what you're doing. I don't need to worry myself in my center line as opposed to other styles, or have that protection element here. Chasing your hand, making sure I'm protected. If I'm out of the way of everything, it's less of a worry. To have the extra piece of protection, I'm here at the same time. So we can demonstrate that. We're not going to go really hard or anything like that. But if Alex can pretty much come into me and do whatever he wants, I won't be concerned. I can come on the inside, I can come on the outside, I can come up here, and I'm in that position. What that gives me is a favourable position for whatever I want to do afterwards. We've made contact, but I'm not trying to make contact with your arms. That's the key. If I was trying to make contact with your arms, it would have a very different feel. And I would definitely feel not as strong, not as connected, and defensive, because I would be reacting to whatever you were doing. If I'm not reacting to what you're doing, I have my posture there, and I'm connected, and I'm ready to do whatever I want and move. So from that side, that's a very, very important point of each one. If I didn't have that elbow position, that 45-degree we talked about, let me show you wrong. So if Alex attacks,
Not good.
no. So what we do is we create a slope, a friction, so we can get a slide. You do it again. This is June. So the 5 elements are extremely prevalent still within each one. The basis of the art was from Xingyi. June is a major element of the 5 fists. It can be protective, it can be aggressive, but the first reaction is if I want to create a shell, I'm here. Because one of my sifus told me, if you're in a fighting situation and your opponent is extremely quick and you need to be guarded, the most important thing you can ever do is June. So if you're in that position, the protection is there. And that is the jump guard. Effectively, it's a double June.
Do you have a lower one as well, or any other shape?
With jump.
Yeah, like for lower protection.
Oh yeah, absolutely, 100%. So this is not this is the predominant jamjong that we develop, and we'll build the power within the body and build that habit of having that protection. But we use other jongs to develop other skills and other expressions of power as well. So a lower jong, which would be something like that, we actually use that to develop bung chuan. The power from bung chuan comes from that. It's protective as well. Although I would never step in to have my arms within that guard, but that would be a bung chuan technique is based from there. So that power I'm storing within the joints, storing within Alex can feel that.
Yeah, that's strong. It's like a tree.
Yeah. But it's relaxed.
Yeah,
It's very relaxed.
it is relaxed.
Yeah, there's no tension within it, and
Kind of springy as well, I can feel.
that is exactly the feeling we want to have in each one. You define it there. It is springy. Springy is quick. It's fast, and it's that flexibility to move and do whatever we want from there.
Yeah.
And that's again, there's no concern on your hands of what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And after I've moved once, I'll move again.
Yeah.
and I'll keep moving,
Yeah.
and then I'll be on you from that perspective. So, and that's really the essence and the flavour of each one. That it's a fast, aggressive style, and that's why you'll see a lot of people practicing what they call the health dance and the movement. And I think that goes back to the essence of it being concerned with the individual, the mind. And I think this was the point that hasn't perhaps come out in translation or understanding from Wang Zhanghai's teaching on how he defined the system. It's not Xingyi. Xingyi is a very powerful, it's a great style, it's a great system, but it has a different context to it, a different thought process. With each one, we're concerned with movement of the body. If Alex comes at me, I'm not thinking about where he is in relation to me. All I'm thinking about is my movement, moving forward and occupying space.
Yeah, you can
expanding my space.
I can feel
Yeah,
it.
yeah. And every time you connect, you should change.
Yeah.
And that's defensive as well.
How is the hung expressed in each one then? Because this, for me, would be a kind of hung, but
Yeah.
you say it's bung.
Yeah, yeah, it's fun. Hung and I mean, there's similarities between the two fists for sure. Traditionally in Xingyi, it's, hung is kind of that outward power. With Dongchuan could be, it's a very close range. Hitting technique can be from here, but with each one, well, it brings on to the point that the non-hitting, what I call the non-dominant hand, is extremely important. Same in Xingyi, but I would say within each one, it can easily be demonstrated. So when this, goes back to Gong, Huang, whatever you want to call it, that non-dominant hand. So if we go back to the Zhan, and I'll show you from there, it's probably the easiest way. So this is a protective guard, as we've talked about. It's also a punch. How can it be a punch? There. So a small turn of my waist, change in my body, the hands remain the same, and you can see my elbows flip. They don't move the angle, they move from the outside to the inside there. That flipping is very important, which I'll talk about in a second. So how we express that into power. And I talked about layering, how we add different things in. So from a one basic layer perspective, we have our Zhang there, then I add the waist into that, then I may add the hip and a step into that. My Zhang hasn't changed, but that is a punch. So and we'll practice that. I talked before about the moment when I was in school in Hong Kong and had that kind of epiphany moment of feeling within the punch, and that's when I realised that I'm not punching you, I'm moving my body. I am moving, and that is a critical difference, or what defines the flavour of each one, is I am not concerned with attacking you. What I'm concerned doing is moving forward and putting my own body into the shape of a punch. There could be an argument made that would sound like a fairly naive approach to fighting if I'm not concerned about fists flying towards my face and multiple fists and weapons and things like that. Yeah. So, well, there's other principles that will go with that as well. So, and it's hard to discuss without a demonstration, but when we move very quickly. And we don't stand still. And going back to what I said in the beginning regarding the Zhan and the reason for it, this is our protection, this is our shell. So if you think of it in terms of what the analogy would be, a porcupine, its first initial reactions to the spikes coming out, your Zhan would be in this direction and would be there no matter what. So if I were to be, it's very different. Let's take a comparison of a style like Wing Chun, which is a great style. I'm trained in it myself, but has certain core principles around center line across the body, about making a bridge with the opponent's arms as a common characteristics of that style, and I would say be reactive to what the opponent does to you. So if someone comes comes in and punches you, tan sao or bong sao or whatever, and then result in action after that. So training this jam zhong instant kind of reaction posture gives us a protection element that can also be attack. Ultimately, what that gives you is a level of confidence within the style, within that protection, that I don't need to worry about my opponent. And that takes us on to the pushing element that you were talking about, what I call chasing hands. And I think it's a big problem in Chinese martial arts that when we want to demonstrate power or technique or skill or ability, we do it through making contact with the opponent's arms and showing them fancy techniques and everything else that you have there. When the reality in a fighting situation, if you are going to attack me or engaged in combat, it's really about hitting each other. So in the true sense of Yi Quan, with that, I would be not concerned about your arms. If I make contact with your arms and there's a change in direction or force from that, but that's not really a place that I want to be, or want to be sticking or making contact with your hands. I want my fist to be connecting with your body or your face, because no doubt that's what you're trying to do to me. So we need to end that confrontation as quickly as possible. So by spending time in this push hands element or way, for me is wasting time. There's a skill set to be developed there, sensitivity and expression of power and things like that, but I think there's a danger element that you can spend far too long doing that, and you can lose the essence of what the style actually is, and a lot of people go down that direction, and I don't necessarily think it's beneficial for them in terms of development. So yes, I've been quite outspoken about push hands and my view of it, because I think it's too dominant, because I think people spend too long doing that, and I think they often judge skill levels by how, within Chinese martial arts, by how good they are at doing push hands, and that can lead to a sense of delusion. So we've seen it in all the recent challenge matches that have gone on, in mainland China, between all these kung fu guys who've come out and challenge MMA fighters and BJJ fighters, and it's rarely come off particularly well. And these are people in my opinion, experience, who are spending a lot of time practicing against a guard, making contact, and thinking they can manipulate and control an opponent in that place. And often they're doing that against willing students as well. Students who not necessarily wanted to be willing, but at the end of the day, if you can't prove it, if you can't show how it can practically be used, it's just that. It's empty theory, and it's meaningless. And going back to the essence of Yi Quan, it is quite unique, this process of being concerned about my body, my alignment, and not what my opponent is doing. It's a very different approach towards fighting, and it might sound like a high-risk approach as well. So I think the only way is to really show what I mean. I will do in relation to fighting, not what you will do.
So change
won't
yourself,
react,
not according to...
But will not react to what you do, which is very, very different to other styles and very systems, and it's a difficult concept to get your head around. It took me some time to realise how that works in practicality, and the only way you can work out how it does work is to have the confidence once you've seen that the technique will protect you. If you train the body correctly and you build that within the body, and that will give you the arms that you do not need to worry about that. Because if I'm constantly concerned about my opponent, there's always going to be somebody who's better than me. There's always going to be somebody who's stronger than me, who's bigger than me. So at some point I will fail along that line. If I become more critical of myself, my technique, how I move, what I do, and less concerned with any opponent out there, as long as what I'm doing is right, it will work.
You stick to the principle, no matter what.
No matter like that, no matter what, be straight kind of horizontal power between yourself. If I wanted to use crossing power, just to give you a little demonstration. So from my basic jam zhong first of all, but I want to be able to demonstrate that with you on how building that up through the jam zhong, through the training, will then manifest itself within the power of the technique. So crossing, this connection between the joints and the elements. So my hand is connected to my foot, my elbow, my knee, my shoulder, my hip. If I want to cross over in this direction, I'm going to keep my Zhan Zhong, but that's when I start to bring my hip and my movement into it. So rather than me punch you in the face to demonstrate it, just so I can give you some sense on how that feels, because you were asking about different directions and different power. So if you just make it quite a fairly strong
Sure.
from a sidewards point of view, that would be there. If we're talking downwards power, now, again, the absolute core principle is, if Alex's arm is here, I'm not thinking about making contact or breaking that. What I'm thinking about is moving my own body into that position there.
Yeah, it's very penetrating and heavy.
It's heavy, but it's fast as well.
Yeah.
And the thing about it is it can move very quickly. So after it's gone once, it will come again.
Yeah, it's penetrating. It's kind of light, but
Springy?
yeah, like it can move very fast, but there's a
Yeah.
stillness still.
Yeah,
Still.
yeah. It's flexible.
Yeah,
It should be, and that's
Yeah.
quite different to how I first learned each one than it was. And I think, to me, also kind of gets into the difference of Xingyi and each one. You rarely see very good Xingyi that's out there that can move that quickly or change and kind of have that flexibility to it. And I think each one really does have that from that perspective, and that's when you can get into kind of the change in directions. So if Alex comes at me and I move here, from there, again, everything comes from the Zhan Zhong. I basically want to be around 45 degrees, so I'll be there, in that position there.
yeah.
It's a
and
very
each time
simplistic
you're
approach.
Simple but direct and effective.
Yeah.
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 And everyone's a hit. It's not to bridge.
No, it's
I can
not.
feel that. It's
I
different
can't
feeling, yeah.
bridge if I want, and I have a choice. So when I have this 45 degree angle, we have the slope. So that means that's a hit. If that was in front of your face, you know, it would be there.
Yeah.
That point that I make contact, I can choose to change if I want. So I can continue to hit, but if you've genuinely, okay, we're talking about me being concerned with what I'm doing, not being concerned with you as an opponent. But let's say theoretically, you have somehow stopped my technique from occurring, and that could happen. It would be very important for me at that point to change my energy, and that's why we keep that 45 degree angle, and we do what's called flipping, just to change it that direction there. So that would be almost in an emergency plan B scenario. If you know I'm coming up here hoping to attack, but for some reason I've been intercepted, then I would change very quick. Yeah. But what I wouldn't then be doing is chasing your arms because that's a dangerous place to be. There's no point in doing that, and I'm just delaying things. Where I want to be is here,
Right.
and here, and here, and here,
Yeah.
and to not stop. If I was chasing your arms at that point, we'd be in some kind of chi sao, stick in hands kind of conflict. We'd be playing a game,
Yeah.
and a lot of the Chinese styles do that.
Yeah.